Nassef is here, at least we have him. So he's going to speak about Islamism and secularism.
The Arabs or Iranians or Southeast Asians from South Asia, they also think that secularism is atheistic, and atheism has no place whatsoever in Islam. Islam emphasizes life hereafter, and secularism means only those matters which pertain to this world. There is no place for the world hereafter as far as secular philosophy is concerned. Now, Islamism is a controversial eulogism whose definition sometimes varies. It can be understood as a set of ideologies holding that Islam should guide social and political as well as personal life. That emphasis on the implementation of Sharia, of pan-Islamic political unity, and of the selective removal of non-Muslim, particularly Western, military, economic, political, social, or cultural influences in the Muslim world that they believe to be incompatible with Islam. So following the Arab Spring, according to Professor Roy, claimed that Islamism has been described as increasingly interdependent with political democracy. So let's go on the secularization thesis. Secularization is the transformation of a society from close identification with religious values and institutions toward non-religious or irreligious values and secular institutions. The secularization thesis refers to the belief that as societies progress, particularly through modernization and rationalization, religion loses its authority in all aspects of social life and governance. As a result of secularization, the role of religion in modern societies becomes restricted. In secularized societies, faith lacks cultural authority. Religious organizations have little social power. Now, one of the who oriented secularism in the literature, G.S. Polio, I don't know if I pronounced his name correctly, he wrote in 1853, secularism is the province of the real, the known, the useful, and the affirmative. It is the practical side of skepticism. Its negative side lays in its relentless attack on what early secularists called the speculative error of religion. I'm more inclined to the definition posited by Professor Talal Assad in his book, The Formations of the Secular, Christianity, Islamic Modernity, Cultural Memory in the Present. According to Professor Assad, religion is a social and historical fact, which has legal dimensions, domestic and political dimensions, economic dimensions, etc. And the way in which people have thought about secularism, that is the separation between state and religion, has in fact been adapted to very different kinds of understandings and actuations. For example, let's think about the examples of states in the West that are supposed to be liberal, democratic, and secular. France, Britain, and the United States. What you have in France is a state that is secular and a society which is secular. In England, you have an established religion and you have a very secular society. In the United States, you have a very religious society and a secular state. There are therefore very different ways in which the negotiation between religion and politics works itself out. There are different kinds of sensibilities, even in these three modern states and societies. There are different kinds of reactions that people have towards what is transgression against secular principles. So he defines secularism as a political doctrine, which is very closely connected to the formation of religion itself as the other, quote-unquote, other of a religious order. It is precisely in a secular state, according to Professor Al-Assad, which is supposed to be totally separated from religion, that it is essential for state law to define again and again what genuine religion is and where its boundaries should properly be. In other words, the state is not that separate. Paradoxically, modern politics cannot really be separated from religion, with religion having its own having its own spheres and politics of its own. The state as a political entity or realm has the function of defining the acceptable public face of religion. Now, I surveyed some scholars, like for example, the one who will come tomorrow, Dr. Khan. His arguments regarding the inseparability of religion and politics in Islam. According to his article in the European Fears to End of Islamism, there are two reasons why religion and politics are intertwined. The first is the increasing use of complex discourses for the purpose of legitimization. Today, all politicians seek to follow the Machiavellian dictum. It is not important to be just, but it is important to be seen to be just. And therefore, politicians and political parties and regimes produce discourses to legitimize their goals and strategies. The second reason he proposed, and perhaps the most important reason why religion will always play a role in crucial issues, is the important role that religion plays in identity formation. All political issues that are important eventually affect individual and collective identity, and in the process trigger religious sentiments. As long as religion plays a role in the identities of people, it will play a role in politics. So we conclude that Islam is the sole source of moral philosophy in most Muslim societies, and envisioning a polity without Islamic values would amount to politics without morality of ethics. Now the second scholar who also argued for the inseparability of religion and politics in Islam is Professor Ira Lapidus. He argued that the prevailing view among the Islamists is that classical Islamic society does not distinguish between the religious and the political aspects of the communal life. The Caliphate was both the religious and the political leadership of the community of Muslims, whose individual believers such as belong to equality defined by religious allegiance. Since Muhammad, peace be upon him, was the prophet who revealed God's will in all of life's concerns, belief in Islam entailed both loyalty to a chief whose authority derived from his religious position and membership in the Ummah, or the community he led. In this sense, religious and political values and religious and political offices were inseparable. But he later argues that Caliphate absorbed Ummah in the beginning, but in religious and political aspects of Muslim communal life came to be separated by a historical process that involved three developments from the 10th to 12th to 13th century. First development is the Arab rebellions against the Caliphate. The second historical development was the emergence of religious activity independent of the actual authority of the caliphs. And the third one is the emergence of the Hanbali school of law. These are three developments in the historical process whereby religious and political aspects of Muslim communal life came to be separated. Now, the other who argue for the separability of religion and politics in Islam, number one is Dr. Asghar Ali Engineer. In his article on Islamic secularism, firstly, he argued that we should make a distinction what is theological and what is historical. The concept that religion and politics cannot be separated is more historical than theological. In fact, the Holy Quran does not give any concept of the state. It only gives the concept of the society. The Quran is concerned with morality rather than polity, and upright conduct, justice, truth, benevolence, compassion, and human dignity are very basic to the Holy Scripture. It repeatedly asserts these values. Thus, it clearly means that these values are very fundamental to an Islamic society rather than to a state. It was thought by early Islamic ulama and jurists that if religion was separated from politics, the rulers would totally neglect these fundamental Islamic values and would behave in a manner which would only satisfy their greed for power. In fact, in those days, there was no concept of secularism as a philosophy of humanism. The ulama were afraid that if religion and politics were separated, there would be absolutely no checks and balances on the conduct of the rulers. In fact, one does not find clear articulation to the effect that religion cannot be separated from politics in Islam in early Islamic sources. This formulation itself is of 19th century origin, when colonial powers began to impose secular laws in Islamic countries, that is, the laws which were not basically derived from Sharia. There was no concept he instigated of the state in Quran. The Islamic state itself is a historical construct. The structure of the Islamic state evolved over a period of time. The Medina, to clarify, in the Medina, the Prophet, peace be upon him, laid the framework of governance through what is known as the Medina Charter or the Covenant of Medina. This covenant also basically respects tribal customs to which adherents to Judaism, Islam, and pre-Islamic idol worshippers belong. Each tribe, along with the religious tradition it belonged to, was treated as an autonomous unit in the covenant, meaning the covenant laid down certain principles which are valid even today in a secular state. When the covenant was drawn by the Prophet of Islam, Sharia as a body of law had not evolved. In this important Medina document, what is important is that the Prophet did not compel different tribes of Jews and idol worshippers to follow the Islamic law. A state structure began to evolve only after the death of the Holy Prophet, when vast areas of other territories were conquered and new kingdoms began to rise. In the primitive Islamic state was democratic in spirit, and the caliphs often consulted their colleagues and companions of the Prophet while making any decision so as to conform to the Quranic values. Thus, Quran and Hadith then were the main sources of law. But in secular matters like building up institutions like army or police or bureaucracy, they did not hesitate to borrow concepts from other sources, such as from Roman or Persian. For example, Uman, from the first few caliphs, borrowed the concept of Diwan, that is maintaining records of salaries to pay army and bureaucracy. Similarly, the caliphs were called upon to legislate on matters like land ownership, suspension of certain punishment during times of emergency, and family personal laws. If secularism is interpreted as an atheist philosophy, no believer in religion would accept it. Secularism, he argued, should be taken in political rather than philosophical sense. Secularism in political sense creates social and political space for all religious communities. He said that our period is characterized as postmodernist period, in which religious pluralism rather than rejection of religion is accepted. Postmodernism recognizes limitations of reason and accepts validity of religious ethos. Islam, must be noted, has no concept of organized church. No single religious authority is considered absolute. There has been, on the other hand, the concept of consensus or ijma among the ulama, which is quite democratic. In fact, consensus has been considered as one of the sources of Islamic law in the Sunni Islam. Also, there is the concept of ijtihad, or independent thinking or reasoning, which infuses the spirit of dynamism and movement. However, pressures are building up in Islamic societies for using the concept of ijtihad. So the Holy Prophet provided equal social and religious space to all religions present in Medina through the covenant. Thus, the doctrine of that religion and politics cannot be separated in Islam is a later historical construct rather than Quranic doctrine. It is human construct rather than a divine revelation. One of the important aspects of modern secularism is, of course, the separation of religion from the state. The most controversial scholar, who is an Egyptian judge, who argued and proposed for the separability of religion and politics in Islam, is Sheikh Ali Abdul al-Bazik. Al-Bazik, in his book Islam and the Principles of Governance, published in 1925, he said that the main points of the book is that Islam did not determine a specific regime, nor did it impose on Muslims a particular system according to the requirements of which they must be governed. Rather, it has allowed Muslims absolute freedom to organize the state in accordance with the intellectual, social, and economic conditions in which they are found, taking into consideration their social development and the requirements of the times, or the temporality of that period. Obviously, the first point of Paul was to affirm that the Quran and the Sunnah, or the traditions of the Prophet, make no mention of the caliphate or any form of state as we understand it. The Quranic verses that traditional fuqaha or scholars commonly attribute as proof of legal requirement of the caliphate actually do nothing of the sort. There are certainly verses which enjoin Muslims to obey God, the Prophet, and the holders of authority, but opinion on the meaning of the term authority differ. Some scholars have thought it to mean that the Prophet's contemporaries and others as the ulama. Another extraordinary accomplishment by Al-Wazir's work was to refute the notion that the caliphate was based on the doctrine of consensus or ijma. Ijma is one of the 4 essential predicates of Sharia law by which it grants divine fiat or decree. In the 4th century, a scholar by the name Ibn Khaldun, that the caliphate he claimed that the caliphate was derived from an ijma or consensus, and thereby almost single-handedly elevated the status of caliphate to a level of dogmatic action. Even Khaldun does not claim the caliphate is the only possible form of Islamic government, but he does state that it had the backing of the companions of the Prophet, thus endowing it with the status of religious obligation. Al-Wazir disagrees politely, but fundamentally with Ibn Khaldun. His view was that the formation of the caliphate was based on nothing more than political necessity and not on ijma. Thus, it denies its juridical basis in the notion of the caliphate as an article of Muslim faith. Rather than acquiesce to caliphs, Muslims have never been in a position to make the kind of free choice on which ijma must be based, whether ijma is binding or not. On the contrary, Muslims have had to suffer caliphates of tyranny, which were abound in the history of Islamic civilization. Now we have these pros and cons regarding whether secularism is incompatible or compatible with Islam. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qaradawi, in his article, How Important Solutions Disastrously Affected Our Muslim Nation, al-Qaradawi opined, for Muslim societies, the acceptance of secularism means something totally different. Since Islam is a comprehensive system of ibadah or worship and Sharia or legislation, the acceptance of secularism means abandonment of Sharia, a denial of the divine guidance and the rejection of Allah's injunctions or God's injunctions. It is a total falsification to claim that Sharia is not proper to the requirements of the present age. The acceptance of a legislation formulated by humans means the preference of the human's limited knowledge to the divine guidance. Now, on the contrary, Professor Abdullahi Ahmed Al-Nahim, in his book, Islam and the Secular State, Negotiating the Future of Sharia, he said that the secular government is the best way to observe Sharia, meaning enforcing Sharia through coercive power of the state negates its religious nature, because Muslims would be observing the law of the state and not freely performing their religious obligation as Muslims. Now, some more neutral position that we can find in the literature is Professor General Esposito in his article, Rethinking Islam and Secularism. He points out that the post-independent period witnessed the emergence of modern Muslim states whose pattern of development was heavily influenced by and indebted to Western secular paradigms or models. Saudi Arabia and Turkey reflected the two polar positions, and the majority of Muslim states chose the middle ground in nation building, borrowing heavily from the West and relying on foreign advisors and Western educated elites. Now, Esposito also argues that in many modern Muslim countries, the role of Islam in state and society as a source of legitimation for rulers, state and government institutions was greatly decreased through the separation of religion and politics. However, while most Muslims govern replaced Islamic law with legal systems inspired by Western secular codes, Muslim family law, marriage, divorce, and inheritance remain enforced. In conclusion, the demonization of Islamists against secularists, vice versa, stemmed from misconstrued and peculiar understanding between them and of historical and cultural particularities. Thus, what we need is a constant dialogue between Islamists and secularists and a regular consultations within their cohorts so as to find a via or middle way from distinguishing shared values and principles. Like, for example, what is happening now in Tunisia, another movement is consulting within their cohorts and also consulting with the opposition during this election era. So that's the end of my report. It's actually a survey of many scholars, and the reason why I haven't been able to submit it to our professors is that I was able to finalize my thoughts and views. But somehow I hope that I was able to relay clearly the message regarding Islamism, the relations or if it's complementing with the secularization thesis. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nassef, for your detailed description of the discussion between secularism thesis and Islamic understanding. This was a comprehensive description, and we would like to thank you for those direct quotations related to each other and have a picture of how the discussion is evolving. And as far as I understand, at the end of your presentation, you actually mentioned about increasing the dialogue between the two sides of the discussion. And actually, I hope this environment is also going to be a new joining to your discussion. So probably we will have some secularism thesis. I hope we will have some secularism thesis and some more Islamist thesis over here. And maybe in that way we can talk about how, at the end of the process, how we are making a contribution to the evolution of this discussion. And actually, if I need to provide any comment on your presentation, it would be that way. I haven't heard enough about your position. This is a report, as you also mentioned. But what you offer as increasing the number of dialogue, increasing the dialogue between these two theses, do you feel that, for instance, as a question, you can also take this, do you feel that we really haven't discussed this relation between these two camps? From my own perspective, we have already made a long historical discussions between these two perspectives, and it seems to me, to some extent, when you refer the history as a judge on these kind of topics, when you refer to the historical development of these two theses or historical development of the East Muslim countries facing with the secular law and secular understanding, secular philosophy, we already established these two camps, claiming that Islam is compatible to some extent with secular institutions. On the other side, Islam is not compatible with secular institutions. But don't you feel that this creates a deadlock? And do you really feel that this discussion, by just referring to the historical evolution of Islam, and does that really does that really provide any proof for essentially describing the relation between Islam and secularism? Because as far as I know, actually it's not my real topic. I generally study international relations theory, but as far as I know, the debate it's a long discussion. It's time, up until right now, we have been discussing this topic, and we are always making a claim that it's compatible or not by just referring to history. We can find a historical evidence going back to some specific time period. And we can say that, do you see that Islam is compatible with secular institutions? Or the other side says, by referring this exactly the same historical fact, claiming that, you see that it's not compatible. So, I think, in some way, I feel that it creates some kind of vicious circle. Maybe in your own position, you can clarify what kind of ways we should develop in order to overcome that positional discussion by just providing subjective readings of historical evidence. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I will take the opportunity of starting a discussion in this call by asking my own question.
Should I answer your
or actually, yeah, we can go one by one because we have enough time. Then maybe another question comes and you can answer.
Actually, I've been studying because I'm also a student of international relations, and I established the research cohort which I call the International Relations Islamic Studies Research Cohort. And our aim is to find a VMD or shared values between the discipline of international relations and the discipline of Islamic studies. More so, wherein the conception of international relations as a discipline has not recognized the contributions made by Muslims or even Islamicists who study Islam in the international affairs field, in the field of international affairs. So this incompatibility or compatibility discourse is really a tiring issue, but we have actually to answer the questions posited by many sectors of the society, whether be they Western or from the Oriental or from the Middle East, or from us, the Muslims and other members or shareholders, stockholders of the society. And I don't think that there will be a deadlock whether if it has been answered, whether it is compatible or incompatible, because many in our experience in these contemporary times, political parties, be they in Indonesia, Philippines, or Malaysia, or in the Arab nations, in Iran and Turkey, has been always somehow responding, replying, or answering through the pervasive impositions or pervasive queries of the products or the ideas left after the colonial era. So we already have answered whether Islam is compatible or incompatible with democracy and all. But if you will go back since in the 8th, 9th, 10th century, there were no discussions about whether Islam is compatible with democracy or because they themselves have adopted or been influenced by Hellenistic philosophies from the Greek civilization, and they have translated many books and articles by Plato, Aristotle, and there were even examples of religious pluralism or a pluralistic religious society. For example, let's take the Mughal Empire. Let's also take an example of the Andalusia, where scholars, Muslims, Jewish, or Christians, live in convivencia or coexistence, or even in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, where all the books have been translated into Arabic by Christians, by Jewish scholars. So we have actually, and even in the Ottoman Empire era, we have the Millet system, where there is a recognition and tolerance of the minorities' practices. So we have had many examples of this. The only question would be is why after the colonial regimes, or why there is somehow a problem that we need to discuss and put into the discourse, that these compatibility or incompatibility with certain ideologies. And I think that these are the propounding positions that we need to take into consideration. For example, the reason probably why there have been such a discourse is because of the decline or the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire that led to, colonialism. And for example, let's take for example the creation of the State of Israel, and which has impacted the scholarship of Islamic thought, and other certain epics, other certain historical era that somehow impacted the scholarship of Islamic thought. And I think that this is also the reason why certain political parties in this modern era have been struggling in throes, or struggling with whether they will adapt secular laws or whether they will be progressive. For example, it could be in three responses. The traditionalists respond where they will reject all the secular laws, they will reject all the innovative or new ideas oriented that comes from Europe or from America. Or the second response, progressive response, we're going to adapt, which we see positive, or which we see advantage to our society. Or we can just say we can just fully adapt everything, because we see that there is no actually conflict with the ethos of Islam.
Any other questions?
We have the.
You were first.
Thank you for very interesting presentation. Actually, brought me back to the early days of the Arab Spring, when Martin and secularism, and what is the structure or the shape of the civil state. And some scholars, they actually trying to bring some examples. Some scholars said initially in the establishment of the Islamic states was not called in the early days of the peace upon him. It was not Islamist, it was a civil state. It was not something called Islamist states. And as well as it support me to the integration and the cooperation between the Islamic group of the Ultra movement in Tunisia and the very far leftists who actually they brought a good model of saving and maintaining the character of the Tunisian state until this moment, and became the beautiful revolution in that country. And it was very intellectual and very modern style that they have agreed on the structure or the shape of the Tunisian state. So in that sense, some good examples, if we put the secularism and I do believe that in the modern history, the cultural history, it's compatible on it's a good debate about these issues. But however, I do see that the Commission is a good one that we can actually decide on, as well as the early days of the Islamic state, nothing as a mission of nation. It's not the Islamic state by itself, but in the current discourse of development and occupation should be Islamist states or
Yes. And I'd like to just give a comment. For example, the imposition of the nation-state system or the Westphalian state system to the Middle East. Muslims hasn't really completely responded. When there were responses coming from political elites such as Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, they responded with accepting secular laws and establishing a nation-state system. There were also some, in the middle ground, accept whether nation-state is compatible with the culture or the local traditions of a society, be they in Southeast Asia or South Asia or in North Africa. and other issues such as issues that Muslim scholars must respond. For example, aside from democracy, aside from the imposition of nation state, for example, let's go to individuality, the gender issue. What is the role? I mean, for example, what is the role of the third sex or the LGBT community within the Muslim community? So I think that Muslim is still trying to struggle and somehow not adapt, but trying to adapt to change to certain changes that is happening in this modern era.
Thanks for the presentation. I think you gave a good overview of many views, and it was a really interesting literature review. But I was asking what you overview finally among these very scattered horizons from one pole to the other. This is my first question. And the second is that different from Yalçın, I think I wanted to argue if this is correct or not. This, for example, the rise of issue of Daesh or ISIS, shows the kind of crisis in the debates for secularism, Islamism, among Muslims. It shows that after 1 century of all these debates, as also you mentioned, wrote this book in 1924. But right now, after all these years, we are still haven't passed that time, or even by another book. So it seems that what is like this, it seems that these debates has been only among the elites, and society haven't changed, evolved in the same time, and so is it put it this way? Do you accept that there is what I mean call secularism crisis among Muslims, in the sense that they haven't fixed their view about finally adopt it or not?
My view was actually, because since many scholars have already argued regarding the compatibility of secularism with Islam, my view would be, of course, finding positive views. For example, finding shared values or principles between two ideologies. I'm not a pessimistic one, which we try to find the conflicting issues that we have to put emphasis on, but we need to put emphasis the positivity of which issues we could find in these two ideologies. That's why I proposed a constant dialogue between these two camps. Regarding why there is a certain crisis in this contemporary era, for example, the emergence of the ISIS. Actually, I don't want to call them ISIS because it's self-declared by themselves as an Islamic state. Because if we ourselves always and we keep on repeating saying that this is an Islamic state, whether we are in the public space or whether we are in the private space with our friends or in the media, we somehow tend to put legitimacy to these fact group. So I think that there should be a correct terminology, like Professor Omid Safi opined, that we should put them label them as a terrorist group. I mean, this is a certain conundrum in the media, especially with Western media. They try to espouse and sensationalize these fact group and make it to a certain extent that somehow would extend their interest.
This fact that they have rising and they have some support by the time, in the first century, still Muslims, okay, they are minority, but still, they have some support.
Yes. I will need to that, to answer your query regarding the emergence of these study group. I think that they are not motivated by theology, by verses, or they are not theologically motivated. But I think that they are politically motivated, meaning that they are the result of first the poor conditions of Muslims in that region because of the pervasive and tantamount intervention of United States, of Europe, that they have experienced from the declaration of the war on terror by Bush to invasion of Afghanistan, Iraq, and other countries. And also, I think that they have experienced. They were a victim. They are victims of human rights violations. Most, I think, of the members of this SAG group were convicts, which were released from the prisoners. That's what, based on the reports that we had. And I think that they don't have a clear understanding of what they're really fighting for. If it's for liberation, for liberty, or to establish a quote-unquote Islamic state. They are somehow a result of more deeper conflict between outside powers and congruent with the contemporary conditions, living conditions of the Arab people.
Just in connection with this, I want to ask some related question. In order to understand the relation between secularism and Islamism, actually we are making first the definitions of secular institutions and Islamist institutions. And by listening to your definitions, I understand that you have a clear definition of what is the Islam. So, for instance, you excluded ISIS out of this picture. So, in your mind, probably you have some clear description of Islam, and this is the Islam. But isn't that the real problem of creating a recircling discussion around the topic? Because you are claiming this is the Islam, the other one is claiming this is the Islam, the other is claiming this is the secular institution, this is. So there's a huge gap of subjectivity over this issue. And if we take this way, if you are providing a description and interacting in a dialogue, then probably you are interacting with someone else who, for instance, from a different perspective, claims that you are misrepresenting, you are misunderstanding the Islam. So, for instance, in this dialogue, any kind of dialogue is some kind of bargaining. And in that dialogue, the weaker side, there are weaker sides and powerful sides. So, isn't there a relation of power and knowledge in this discussion? And who defines the Islam is actually the powerful side? And this is to some, isn't this to some extent a political discussion?
I get your point. Why I am excluding ISIS as a phenomenon in Islamism, and to some certain extent that when we are in a dialogue, we need to find compromise or bargaining chip, and we need to somehow the powerful would distinguish whether this group is Islamist or that group is not Islamist. I think that the reason why I said in the definition that Islamism is somehow a eulogistic terminology that have been used in many variations, in different ways. Some scholars would say that Al-Qaeda or Taliban are not Islamist group. Some would say that they are Islamist group. Some would say that the propensity of Hezbollah, of Hamas, are also not Islamists, or they may also be perceived as Islamist group. Although they have different variations, they have different orientations. So I think that in finding a dialogue, you're right that we need to somehow define what is the other camp, what is the definition of this camp and the definition of that camp, or the description, let's say. So I think that I don't think that me claiming that ISIS as not an Islamist group may impede to my advocacy of finding a dialogue will somehow in contradiction of my advocacy. I would still stand to my claim that these terrorist group is not an Islamist and should not therefore be part of the dialogue. And I would say that other Islamist groups are Islamists oriented by their principles, oriented by their aims, objectives, and purpose.
I don't have any question actually, but I propose that since you dealt with Islamic secularism, is to check Malaysia, specifically the Department of Political Science, where the current Prime Minister of Turkey was the head of the department. There's a lot of literature and there is a lot of scholars who actually focusing on Islam and secularization and secularism. Also, in relation to the international relations, mainly you are focusing on literature that is from North America or the West, but we need to look at the East also. Just find out what actually the former rector of International Islamic University, I come from, I'm not related, but I teach there. He is a mechanical Muslim, wrote his PhD thesis in 1980s on Islam and international relations. And there are still currently a number of scholars, not necessarily in Malaysia, they are international, writing in English about Islam. Also, I strongly recommend that you read Abba's book, saying Abbas found the institute which I work in, not very saying Nabi Najib al-Abbas. But Tariq is teaching in Singapore. But Nabi, he found the International Islamic Thought and Civilization, which is a copy of McGill University in Montreal. And he is actually the first, I would call, Muslim intellectual book of Islamic civilization. That's a book published by Muslim youth in Malaysia in the 1970s. It's still around, it's old, but that book has become a classical book on Islamic civilization. And if you come to Kuala Lumpur, the university, the International Islamic University, is actually all in English, and there's